Hi, this is Chloe Hartung, and this is my project number 2 on influencers. I decided to focus on the Every Student Succeeds Act and the role that teachers' unions played in its enactment. The Every Student Succeeds Act was signed by President Obama on December 10th, 2015, and it represented a new era for our nation's schools. This bipartisan measure builds off of its successors, the No Child Left Behind Act, and also the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The previous version of the law, No Child Left Behind, also known as NCLB, was enacted in 2002. NCLB represented a significant step forward for our nation's children in many aspects. It shined a light on where students were making progress and where they needed additional support, regardless of race, income, zip code, disability, home language, or background. The law was scheduled for revision in 2007, and over time, NCLB's prescriptive requirements became increasingly unworkable for schools and educators. Recognizing this fact, in 2010, the Obama administration joined a call from educators and families to create a better law that focused on the clear goal of fully preparing students for success in college and careers. ESSA included provisions that were intended to help ensure success for students and schools. Here are just a few. They wanted to advance equity. They wanted everyone to be held to high academic standards, the same ones that could help them succeed in both colleges and careers. They wanted vital information to be shared with communities through statewide assessments, and they wanted to help support and grow local innovations, specifically using evidence to invest in different innovation and promise neighborhoods. They also wanted to expand the investments that the Obama administration started to increase access to high-quality preschools. They also wanted to maintain an expectation that there was accountability and action to affect positive change in the lowest performing schools. So ESSA included provisions that were intended to help ensure success, but Congress passed ESSA for 3 main reasons. The first reason was that Congress passed ESSA in response to executive overreach through programs like Race to the Top and NCLB waivers. The U.S. Department of Education and the Secretary of Education at the time, Arne Duncan, used these programs to incentivize states to change laws around teacher evaluation, state standards, and accountability systems more broadly. Race to the Top used stimulus funds from 2009 to 2010 in order to create state competition that would reward certain state policy changes. So how is the Every Student Succeeds Act better than No Child Left Behind? Though it did have bipartisan support, there were reasons for support and opposition for this particular act. The ESSA provided more flexibility on testing than No Child Left Behind. It also ended adequate yearly progress, which is a measure that required schools to show and prove test score gains from year to year. Schools that failed to meet those goals were penalized. Other provisions in the Every Student Succeeds Act were also genuine steps forward, like preschool development grants for low-income children, and it even included an art education fund. In addition, the new law dropped the term core academic subject. Instead, it described a well-rounded education, meaning that subjects like social studies and the arts and music were less likely to be collateral damage of the No Child Left Behind Act. The ESSA also stopped the practice of putting multiple student subgroups, like students with disabilities or low-income students, for example, into super subgroups. That practice can mask inequities. As for reasons for oppositions, there were some things in ESSA that were a little too similar to No Child Left Behind. Schools would need to monitor academic performance of vulnerable groups, which includes students living in poverty. So states who still had to test They still were required to test 95% of children, and they still had to intervene in the lowest performing schools. But that meant that ESSA would likely do very little to disrupt the No Child Left Behind pattern of punishing vulnerable children and the low performance of the schools that they attended. It was assumed that it would not fix achievement gaps. The new law seemed unlikely to pause the practice of disproportionately penalizing vulnerable students and their schools. For example, when Chicago had to close 49 elementary schools, African American students were the majority population in 90% of those schools, and nearly 60% of schools had a high concentration of special needs students. Often, charter schools, which received increased support under the Expanding Opportunity Through Quality Charter Schools section of ESSA, would replace these closed public schools. But charter schools have a mixed record, particularly with English language learners and children with disabilities. The two best-known teacher unions in the United States are the National Education Association, or NEA, and the American Federation of Teachers. Spring took a quote from Wayne Urban, which says, "Teachers organized for two major reasons to improve wages and working conditions and to secure seniority. Through the pursuit of salary scales and other policies, teachers sought to institutionalize experience or seniority as the criterion for success in teaching. Not all public school teachers are their members, nor are all of their members public school teachers. Membership also includes support staff in public schools, such as secretaries, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and others outside of schools. The AFT's 900,000 members at the start of the 21st century, coupled with the NEA's 2.3 million, gave the two unions representation of about 3/4 of all public school teachers, 40% of all unionized public employees, a total income at the state, local, and national levels of nearly $1.5 billion, 6,000 employees, more than both major political parties combined, and a distribution of membership and power from rural areas all the way to urban centers like New York City. The NEA and the AFT are the most effective teachers' unions that exist in America. According to Larry J. Sabato, who's the director for the Center of Governmental Studies at the University of Virginia, he said they're the most effective union players because they not only have the money and the muscle, they also have a positive public image from repressing teachers that much of labor lacks. The NEA and AFT are very influential in party politics. The most important element is actually manpower and woman power. Volunteers in the campaigns and people getting out the vote. That counts more than money. This quote is from a speech that former President Barack Obama made while he was still in office on March 10, 2009, and it was met with praise from both unions. Though it was controversial to consider if teacher evaluations should be completed using test scores, both unions initially supported Obama's plan to improve education through the overhaul of the No Child Left Behind. Brandy Weingarten of the AFT said that they, like Obama, had a similar vision of education. Weingarten said, "The president's view of education and the AFT's include world-class standards for all students, new and better tools for teachers, greater effort to recruit and retain teachers, and competitive teacher salaries with innovative ways to reward teacher excellence." Weingarten also cautioned Obama, saying that it would be important to include educators in the final plans and details of the president's intended overhaul. Dennis Van Rockel of the NEA was also quoted as saying, "We, like President Obama, advocate for improving professional development and mentoring for new and less effective teachers. A national investment in recruiting some of the most talented individuals into the field of teaching, as well as investing in scaling up innovative teacher preparation and induction models and raising teachers' compensation based on their knowledge and skills." But he actively avoided mentioning Obama's plan for extra pay based on student achievement. This table is from Bellwether Education Partners, who've sourced this data from the NEA, the AFT, edweek.org, civilrights.org, and the New York Times. It displays the various support and opposition of various groups relating to ESSA. You can notice some strange alliances that probably formed during these debates relating to the plan and the issues within it. For example, the AFT and NEA aligned closely with the Tea Party and congressional Republicans who lauded the elimination of waiver requirements that teacher evaluation be based significantly on student outcomes. These requirements were highly unpopular among teachers, the Tea Party, and Republicans saw them as overly prescriptive. The civil rights community and congressional Democrats were more mixed on this component, expressing concern that eliminating this requirement could lessen the accountability on teachers to raise students' scores. Shortly after entering office, Obama announced his support for using student test scores for teacher evaluations. It's possible this is because he didn't want to lose the support of the teacher unions, which is usually vital in gaining votes from educators. Unions often support Democratic candidates, but had he announced this particular plan earlier, he may not have gotten as much support from the AFT and NEA as he did. Though not proven, it's assumed this was intentional. The Chamber of Commerce, National Governors Association, and over 100 civil rights groups joined the unions in support. The largest interest groups in education were all advocating for change. Their support was successful, and ESSA ended up giving power to individual states to define teacher effectiveness, what measures to include in the school accountability system, and which standards to use. This provides an important opportunity for educators, researchers, policymakers, and the public to discuss normative questions around what schools should prioritize and what is good teaching. For example, in Ohio, the Department of Education held a number of informational sessions to garner public feedback about the decisions being made. This also means that the role of Secretary of Education is limited under ESSA. The law stipulates that the federal government may not define how teachers are to be evaluated or what standards or standardized tests states should use. While this means that unions may have to continue to fight at the state and local levels, they were certainly successful in limiting the power of the federal government relating to teacher evaluations. I included sources from each slide down at the bottom, but these are all of my sources in APA format. Some of these are from previous modules, and others are sources that I found on my own.